Welcome back to episode 2 in this special two-part series on the Warsaw Uprising with a guide at the Warsaw Uprising Museum, Aleksandra Duda. If you haven't watched episode 1, I recommend you do so. You can do that by looking at the First News channels wherever you're watching this episode, and you'll find it there. Now, Olu, if I can call you that, you talked about in the first episode about how the Polish resistance were able to capture large parts of the city, but not some of the crucial areas, the strongholds. And essentially, the Polish resistance get trapped in these pockets. Why did the rising carry on for 63 days when it was fairly obvious that the battle couldn't be won?
Well, we were really desperate to take control of the city because this was the last chance we might have brought freedom to our country. Yes, we need to remember that the Warsaw Rising was not only the battle for the liberation of Warsaw, it was the battle for liberation of the whole Poland. So the fiercest battle, in fact, took place in the Old Town, where we struggled for 3 weeks. Yes, and it's known that German commanders would send reports that please bring in another division because we are losing 250 soldiers a day. So you may imagine on what scale it was here.
We talked about the genocide in these opening weeks. The Germans switch tactics as the battle goes on. They stop mass murdering and mass raping children and women. Why is that?
Because they did it for practical reasons. Yes, World War II was still on, and they thought it's better to send them to forced labor than kill them on the spot. Yes,
and I guess it's also slowing them down because they're busy raping and murdering and robbing rather than moving towards the Soul Town. So it's a stalemate essentially. The Germans aren't gaining much ground, but the Poles. How does the battle progress? What happens, for example, to the Old Town?
Well, Germans were taking more and more territory, so we were trapped, as you said, and our situation was very, very difficult because insurgents were fighting, but civilians had to hide in basements. Yes, how much time can you spend in the basement? Yes, a day or two. They were living for weeks. Yes, kids were being born, people were dying in those cellars. So the civilians start to be more and more fed up with the whole situation. Yes, that's why, this was drawing us to the end. And in fact, after August, at the beginning of September, we led capitulation talks to the German side. But Stalin learned about that, and it's known as his great maneuver because he made us believe that finally they would come with their help. We heard the artillery. Germans were pushed to the left river bank of the Vistula River. All bridges were blown up by the retreating army, and Soviets finally stood at the right river bank of the Vistula River, but they stopped and they did nothing.
So this is a very good moment to talk about this Allied help. So the Soviets had previously been close, but not close enough.
Yeah, about 20 miles from Warsaw.
20 miles, so enough that you can hear the artillery and think they're coming because they've been going this enormously fast sweep.
And they would send communiques. May 1 million people of Warsaw become 1 million soldiers. What are you waiting for? We are almost there. We'll help you. That's, as we said, we wanted to liberate the city before they do that.
What about the Allies from the West? You've got the Americans and the British forces, and the Poles are sending desperate pleas for help, I assume. What help comes?
Well, the British and the Americans had to ask Stalin for approval for landing of the aircrafts, for example. That's why the airdrops come from the Brindisi British air base, and these missions are flown by British, Canadian, Australian, Polish pilots. Very difficult missions that last for 12 hours at night. They come here and drop supplies of weapons, ammunition, medical aid, food. And these airdrops are very, very precise. We are here just below a huge one replica of American Liberator. Such Liberators would come together with the Halifaxes. They would descend very, very low at 100 feet. And we're happy that finally someone is doing something about our fate. But this was very limited.
I'm assuming that flying above a burning city at 150 feet slowly so that you can drop a package out is basically you know, it's as near suicidal a mission as you can possibly get.
Mm.
What were the emotions of the Polish pilots as they're flying over their capital city and seeing, maybe for the first time, exactly what's happening on the ground?
Well, this Liberator, which is found here in our museum, commemorates Polish crew who flew to Warsaw 6 times. Unfortunately, the 6th time they got shot by a German fighter who within 1 hour and a half destroyed 3 Liberators. 2 of the member crew were Warsawians, yes, so they remembered Warsaw from 1939. They left here, their families. So I always think, what were their thoughts when they were flying just above heads of their beloved ones, and they saw streets where they went to school, and they had their first meetings with their loved ones. So it's unthinkable, yes, because they never saw them again.
How many people died in the Warsaw Uprising? How many civilians and how many soldiers?
It said that there were about 200,000 victims, yes. 18,000 insurgents and more than 150,000 civilians who got killed or died in bombardments.
So plus or minus, because the bodies are never recovered.
Yeah, exactly.
And where are these people buried? I mean, you see
well,
pictures.
This was a huge problem because after the end of the Rising, 200,000 people are lying buried or unburied here. So Red Cross had lots to do. Yes, that's why, as we mentioned earlier, 12 tons of human ashes were found, yes, and so we are walking the bones of those who perished at that time.
Now, what I read often is that 85% of the city was destroyed by the end of the Second World War. I think people sometimes get confused and think that all took place in the Warsaw Uprising.
No.
Can you maybe break that down a little bit and maybe let's dispel that myth?
After the end of the Rising, half of the city was still standing, yes, because during the Rising, 25% of the city is affected due to bombardments, due to the fighting, yeah. Early on, 25% was already destroyed. We need to remember that Warsaw capitulated in September 1939, yes, after a 3-week siege. And after the end of the Rising, Germans expelled the whole remaining population, those who survived. 650,000 people had to leave their homes. Later, building after building, everything is looted. 40,000 wagons, 18,000 lorries, yes, they are all directed to the Third Reich.
With stuff basically stolen from people's flats.
Exactly. Carpets, pieces of furniture, pieces of art, anything, yes, that was useful to Germans.
So this is after the uprising. After the Poles surrendered, the Germans are putting all this effort, 40,000 wagons, into stealing stuff from the capital of Poland. And then what happens? Are they blowing buildings up?
Yeah, they are detonating building after building. So imagine how much dynamite was spurred here. Because Hitler had this idea that Warsaw had to be just a mere geographical point on the map of Europe.
So wiped off the face of the earth.
Exactly.
And by January 1945, when the Soviets eventually do come in.
Yes, they finally liberated Warsaw, a bit too late, yes.
And
they liberated the city of ruins, the city of ghosts, yes, because there was no one living here.
I have sort of, it brings a huge amount of emotion in me as someone who's lived in Warsaw just for 10 years. I wonder how, obviously we're sitting in this incredible museum. How do Warsawians and Polish people commemorate the Warsaw Uprising?
Every August the 1st at 5 p.m., all people of Warsaw stop for a minute of silence. And this is a very emotional moment because Warsaw is in a constant rush, yes. And when it comes to 5 p.m., the whole city of Warsaw stops to commemorate heroes of the past, yes. Those people who gave their lives for homeland. And the question arises, what do we do with our lives, yes? What are the remparts of our humanity and of our dignity, whether we have something to defend in our lives, yes. I'm always asking myself this question whenever it comes to August the 1st.
You work as a guide in this museum, so is it popular? How many people come? What countries do they come from?
Well, generally we have about 700,000 visitors a year, so we are the second most visited museum in Poland right after the Auschwitz Memorial. And we are happy that people are so much interested in history nowadays. And we see people from all countries. Of course, we have also visitors from Germany and Russia. It's very important that we all want to build better future based on mutual understanding and the truth, because for many, many years it was not that clear, and we need to remember that Poland was behind the Iron Curtain and no information about Warsaw Rising.
So in fact, you've got, there's no soldiers' books aren't released at this time. There's no memoirs written, because this basically is treated as a criminal enterprise by Stalin. And if you put your hand up and say, I fought in the Rising, what would happen? You get arrested? Students
were dropped out of schools. The very first monument dedicated to the memory of the Rising was unveiled in Warsaw in 1989. So imagine, for the 45th anniversary of the Warsaw Rising.
So it's basically dampened down for this entire period. Do you agree with me, perhaps, that therefore, people don't really think about, if you say the word Stalingrad, most people will have an association with that word somewhere, they have it. When you say Warsaw, perhaps they don't have that. What's the level of knowledge of people coming to the museum? Are they surprised by what they find?
They are shocked. They are shocked because they were never taught on the subject. Yes, and oh my God, so much suffering, and how did you endure all of that? Yes, and how can you prevail? Yes, and this is fascinating, because I think one of the key messages of the Warsaw Rising is that human hatred may destroy everything that's material, but it cannot destroy what lies in our hearts. That's why the message of Warsaw is so powerful. Yes, the city which was defeated but remained unsubdued.
Well, I can't think of a better moment to finish this second episode in our special two-part series. We're obviously hugely grateful for the Museum of the Warsaw Rising for giving us this incredibly large space to film this two-part episode. This was our special episodes on the Warsaw Uprising, and as Ola has mentioned, we invite you on the 1st of August, wherever you are, at 5 o'clock Polish time, to take a moment to reflect on exactly what Ola's just said there. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again for the next episode of Heart of Poland.